Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of really interesting stuff about these Lincoln-Douglas debates from way back in 1858.
Yeah.
And it's like we're opening up this time capsule, and there's all these intense arguments and speeches and a ton of drama.
hmm
So we're going to try to figure out what made these debates so important and what they can tell us about the things that led to the Civil War.
These weren't just about two guys running for office. I mean, they were really about the future of America
Yeah.
and the question of whether slavery should be allowed to spread.
Right.
Imagine like your school is having this huge debate, but instead of arguing about, pizza or tacos for lunch,
Yeah.
they're debating something that could change the whole country.
Wow, that is a big deal.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this idea of popular sovereignty.
Okay.
I know that the sources mentioned Stephen Douglas was a big supporter of that,
Well,
right?
yeah, Douglas believed that each state should get to decide for itself whether or not to allow slavery.
Okay.
He thought that was the fairest way to deal with such a controversial issue.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But it didn't really work out so well in Kansas, where
Really?
you had people from both sides of the slavery debate rushing in, and it led to violence and bloodshed.
Oh,
It was
wow.
a really messy situation.
Yeah.
They called it Bleeding Kansas.
So it wasn't just words.
Right.
It had real consequences.
Exactly.
So what about Lincoln? What did he think about popular sovereignty?
Well, Lincoln strongly disagreed with Douglas.
Okay.
You see, Lincoln believed that slavery was morally wrong, and he couldn't stand the thought of it spreading to new territories.
Makes sense.
He felt that the entire nation had to be united against slavery, and he believed that the federal government should have the power to stop its expansion.
Okay, so they had very different ideas about how the country should be run.
Yeah.
Now there's this Dred Scott decision that keeps coming up.
Uh-huh.
Can you explain what that was all about?
Sure. So the Dred Scott decision was a ruling by the Supreme Court
Okay.
that basically said that slaves were property, not citizens.
And that slave owners could take their property anywhere, even into free states.
Wow.
So this decision really threw a wrench into the whole debate about slavery because it basically said that Congress couldn't restrict slavery in the territories.
So that sounds like a huge setback for the people who wanted to stop the spread of slavery.
It was.
Did this decision come up a lot in the debates?
Oh, absolutely. Lincoln saw the Dred Scott decision as a really dangerous step in the wrong direction.
Okay.
He argued that the Supreme Court had gone too far and that the decision was a threat to the very idea of freedom and equality that America was founded on.
It sounds like Lincoln was really passionate about this issue.
He was.
How did Douglas respond to Lincoln's arguments about Dred Scott?
Well, Douglas said that the Dred Scott decision was the law of the land and that everybody had to respect it even if they didn't agree with it.
Hmm. Interesting.
This actually caused him some trouble because some of his supporters in the South thought that he wasn't strong enough in his defense of slavery. They felt that if he truly believed in popular sovereignty, he should have supported the right of states to allow slavery.
So even within his own party, there were disagreements about how to deal with this issue.
Yeah,
You could really see how divided the country was becoming.
absolutely.
And it was only going to get worse from there.
Right. You're absolutely right. The country was really divided, and these divisions were on full display during the Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Right.
These weren't just, some boring speeches.
Yeah.
These were huge events that drew enormous crowds.
Wow.
People would travel for miles to hear them argue, and the atmosphere was electric.
It's hard to imagine politicians today debating like that for hours.
I know, right?
What were their strategies for trying to win over voters back then?
Well, they didn't have things like social media or TV to get their message out there.
Right.
So they had to go directly to the people and tailor their speeches to different audiences. Illinois at the time, was a mix of really strong anti-slavery communities and areas that were more sympathetic to the South.
Hmm.
So they had to be very careful about what they said in different parts of the state.
That makes sense. It's like they had to adjust their arguments depending on who they were talking to.
Exactly.
How did Lincoln manage that, especially since he was so strongly against slavery?
Yeah. Well, Lincoln had to walk a fine line.
Right.
He knew that he couldn't alienate moderate voters if he wanted to win.
Right.
One of his most famous speeches from this time is his House Divided speech,
Okay, I've heard of that.
where he warned that the nation couldn't survive half slave and half free.
Hmm.
Some people thought the speech was too radical, but it also showed that Lincoln was willing to take a stand on principle.
Yeah. Okay, so what about Douglas? What was his main strategy?
Douglas really hammered home this idea of popular sovereignty.
Okay.
He truly believed that letting each state decide for itself was the best way to keep the peace and avoid a civil war. He said it was the most democratic approach, giving the power to the people.
But didn't some people think that just avoided dealing with the real problem of slavery?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Lincoln argued that Douglas's position was morally wrong.
Hmm.
He said that you can't just allow people to be enslaved because a majority voted for it.
Right.
That doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
And these debates really force people to think about some big questions like what is democracy? What does freedom really mean? What does equality look like?
Those are really big questions.
They are, and they're questions that are still important for us to think about today.
Yeah, you're right. It's amazing to think that these debates from so long ago still have relevance to our lives today.
Absolutely.
Okay, so besides all the serious stuff, was there also some like classic political drama?
Oh, yeah.
The sources mentioned some pretty intense mudslinging going on.
Oh, there was plenty of that. Both sides accuse each other of lying and corruption and being unfit for office.
Wow.
They even brought up personal scandals and past mistakes, just trying to make each other look bad.
So kind of like those reality TV shows where people are always arguing and trying to bring each other down.
Yeah, something like that, I guess. But it's important to remember that this was a different time and
Right.
people were really, really passionate about their beliefs.
Yeah.
They weren't afraid to get a little rough, to defend those beliefs.
But even with all the drama, it sounds like both Lincoln and Douglas were very skilled speakers.
Oh, absolutely. They were masters of rhetoric,
Yeah.
using language to inspire and persuade their audiences.
Uh,
They had some pretty epic burns and witty comebacks, too.
really? Like what?
Well, for example, in one debate, Douglas accused Lincoln of changing his position on slavery to appeal to different crowds.
Oh, that's harsh.
It was, and Lincoln's response was great. He said, "I'm not bound to follow Douglas's lead. I've been fighting slavery longer than he has."
Ooh, I bet that stung.
The crowd loved it. These weren't just speeches, they were performances. They used everything they could: logic, emotion, humor, even a bit of showmanship to try and win over the crowds.
It sounds like you really had to be there to experience it.
You really did.
So we've talked about the arguments and the strategies and the drama,
Uh-huh.
but what was the lasting impact of these debates?
Well, the Lincoln Douglas debates had a profound impact on American history.
Okay.
They helped to shape public opinion on slavery and set the stage for the Civil War.
Wow.
But perhaps even more importantly, they really elevated Abraham Lincoln to national prominence.
Interesting.
Even though he lost the election for the Senate seat,
Okay.
he gained something far more valuable recognition as a powerful and eloquent voice for the anti-slavery cause.
So it's amazing to think that even though Lincoln lost the election, the debates actually helped him become president a few years later.
Yeah.
It's almost like those debates were his stepping stone to the White House.
Exactly. Think about it like this. Imagine someone in your class, runs for class president and gives a speech that everyone remembers, even if they don't win.
Okay.
That speech might actually make them even more popular than the person who won. And that's kind of what happened with Lincoln.
Okay.
These debates gave him a platform to share his views with the entire nation, and people really connected with his message of unity and freedom.
So these debates weren't just about one election. They had a much bigger impact on like the whole course of history.
Absolutely. I mean, they really captured the tension and division that was tearing America apart at the time. It was like the
Yeah.
whole country was holding its breath, watching to see what would happen next.
It's kind of like when you're reading a really good book and you can't wait to find out what happens at the end.
Yeah.
But in this case, the ending was a very serious and impactful one.
It is important to remember that these debates weren't just about winning arguments. They were about fundamental questions of right and wrong, about
Yeah.
what kind of nation America was going to be. And the issues they debated, things like equality, freedom, and justice, are things that we're still talking about and working towards today.
That's what's so fascinating about history, then. We can learn from the past and see how those events continue to shape the world we live in today.
Exactly.
So, what can we take away from these debates that happened over 150 years ago?
Well, I think the Lincoln Douglas debates remind us that democracy is a process.
Okay.
And it's not always an easy process.
Yeah.
It involves listening to different perspectives, having difficult conversations,
Right.
and finding ways to work together even when we disagree.
Mm.
These debates also highlight the importance of standing up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular.
That's a really powerful message.
It is.
It's inspiring to see how these two figures used their words to fight for what they believed in, even when they faced so much opposition.
Yeah, it reminds us that we all have a voice,
Uh huh.
and that we can use our voices to make a difference in the world. Whether it's speaking up against injustice or advocating for change or just engaging in thoughtful discussions,
Yeah.
we can all contribute to building a more just and equitable society.
Well, this has been an incredible journey back in time.
It
We've
has.
explored the arguments, the strategies, the personalities, and the lasting impact of these iconic debates.
The Lincoln Douglas debates offer a really fascinating glimpse into a pivotal moment in American history.
Yeah.
By understanding the issues they debated and the choices they made, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of our nation's past
Mm.
and the ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union.
That's a great way to sum it up. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
You're welcome.
And for all of you listening, we hope this journey has sparked your curiosity about history
Yeah.
and inspired you to learn more about the fascinating figures and events that have shaped our world.